Hey everybody, this is Andrew Bensley, co-host of Community Notice Board podcast and a former guest at the Andy Social podcast. Just telling you guys to come check mine out, the Community Notice Board. Fuck, I can't do it.
There's not a gun to his head right now, I promise you. It seems like there is. But yeah, listen guys, we do a great podcast called Community Notice Board. We've had some great guests on in the past, Becky Lucas, Luke Heggie, and that's what I reckon. And James, what's the pod about?
It's about suburbs we grew up in. So we talk about the guest's local history with the place, must-see places that you have to visit, coming-of-age tales, and the hometown heroes that we just can't forget.
Yeah, so give it a listen on all podcast apps and all that sort of shit.
Hell yeah.
And yeah, thanks a lot.
See ya.
Hey, welcome back to the Andy Social Podcast, episode 295 of my little show. And my guest on this episode is Tobias Gustavsson. And Tobias is the frontman for Swedish band Nestor. And you might not be familiar with them, or maybe you have if you've been following me on the socials, because I've been gushing about this band so far this year. This band has literally come out of nowhere. They've only released 2 songs, and these 2 songs, in my humble opinion, are like my top songs of 2021 so far. And it's going to be really hard to knock these songs off the perch because they are absolutely incredible. The 2 songs are On the Run and most recently the song 1989, and just incredible stuff, like amazing songwriting. And I think on the topic of songwriting, when I was listening to these songs originally, I'm thinking, man, how do you craft such an amazing song like this? And well, you're going to find out in this episode because Tobias is a professional songwriter. He's had a long career in the music industry, and I've been digging into his past, and I'm just absolutely floored by what a talent Tobias is. And he's such a nice guy. I had a great time talking to him. Tobias was talking to me from his home just south of Barcelona in Spain, and the rest of the guys are based in Sweden. He's originally from Sweden himself. He's lived in Germany for a while, but anyway, all this stuff is going to be discussed in the chat, so you're going to hear it soon. But everything I talk about, or we talk about, will be in the show notes over at andysocial.net and andydowling.net. You can follow Nestor on the socials on Facebook and Instagram. Just search for Nestor the band. And of course, I'll have the streaming platform links. I'll have the 2 video clips in the show notes as well. So everything will be there. You can go and check it all out. Hopefully you enjoy the tunes. I reckon you probably will. But I really hope you enjoy this chat with the amazing Tobias Gustavsson.
It's great to see all the reactions, and we were a little bit uncertain because the first song we released, On the Run, is more of a, as you know, more of a like 86 kind of metal track. It has the riff and all that, and 1989 is more like in a way, a pop song, but with rock kind of influences. So we were a little bit like, I wonder if they're going to like it that much. But now, you know, when the video there's a lot of views and stuff, so it feels like everyone's taking that song to their heart as well, which is great. Thank you very much.
Oh, I mean, I'm a big AOR fan. I love that 80s melodic rock, and just I think what you guys have done with both songs is that you're playing tribute to so many like amazing bands. Like I can hear all the influences in the 2 songs, and there's only 2 songs. And I think a lot of people that I'm sharing the songs with, everybody's saying the same thing. A, they love it, but also, where the hell have these guys come from? Like, just out of nowhere. So, what's the background? Because I've tried to go online to have a look to see what the history is, and I can see a couple of little bios that you guys have written. But what's the origin story?
Well, the thing is that we all of us are from a small town in Sweden called Falköping, which is just a regular small town, I guess. And we grew up there and started playing music when we were about 15, something like that, 14. Yeah, 1989. And we all kind of, as you mentioned, we were all into that scene, you know, the 80s scene with Van Halen and Twisted Sister and Kiss and, you know, and then, yeah, formed the band and we started playing. So, and then we, you know, released a couple of albums, not albums, EPs, which back in the day, they're still around, but they weren't released on a big label or anything, so you can't really get them. But we released 2 EPs, and then we ended up broke up the band like 95, I think. So that was the story. But I have since then, the only thing I've done is I've only worked with music. So I had a couple of other bands that were quite successful, and I've been a songwriter and all that. So it wasn't that far for me, it was kind of natural when sorry, I'm going one way and then the other way, but it was like we started in 9, ended up in 95, broke up about 95, but then we stayed in contact, and I've always done music, and the guitar player Johnny has always been into music as well, and we toured a little bit together, and the other guys, they went on with some cover bands or whatever. So we've seen each other for Christmas and all that, and then normally we just went down to the rehearsing room and have a couple of beers and play the songs. And then when the pandemic came, I got this idea that I was sitting I live in Spain, by the way, nowadays, so I was sitting in my house. And we had a really, as I guess you had as well, a really tough confinement. So I was sitting there playing the piano and thought that it would be nice just to somehow go into this time machine and go back to kind of 89 when it all started and kind of try to do the album that we didn't have the skills or the possibilities to do back then and do it now. So that was the start of it. And then when we got going, it felt like, and we should also have a little bit of Kiss in there. Oh, what about this song? And what about that? And you listening to all of a sudden we were sitting, me and the guitar player Johnny, listening to all the vinyls from that era, from 84 up to 90s, and like, this is what we're gonna do, basically.
Oh, that's cool. I think it's interesting because there's so many bands and musicians going into sort of like the end of 2019 into 2020 when the pandemic hit and everybody stopped. We couldn't do anything. And what we're finding now is that those bands are starting to release music now or starting to get back out and slowly start to play shows again. But there's all these new creations that are coming out of this pandemic. And so it's interesting because one of the questions I was going to ask you was this something that had been festering and growing before the pandemic and it stopped and you had to wait a while, but it from what you just said, it's actually come out of the time that you've had to sit at home and not be able to do a great deal else.
Yeah, it wasn't planned to it was the pandemic, I have to say, because I think, and the reason for it is, even though I think it's like when the world came to a stop, basically, and it's easy to kind of look back and think about those times where everything was really, safe, and when you were a teenager and you had like this huge visions of becoming a rock star or whatever, and living in a small town where you knew everyone and everything was like, it kind of, I think the reason is that in a world that's where everything is crazy with the pandemic, you kind of look back and want to go back to something that felt, safe, so to speak. So I think that was the reason why. Then, of course, the 80s scene has always been like my biggest influence. So it wasn't like it would have been strange if we would have done Kraftwerk album. That would have been strange as we rock music.
So you mentioned, well, there's a couple of different directions I could go, but you quickly mentioned that sort of after Nestor broke up in the 90s and you've gone off particularly like to go off and continue to be a musician, continue to be a performer and a songwriter as well, because I'm not familiar with you at all. I don't know what your background is. So what kind of things were you doing after Nestor and leading up to 2020?
Well, after Nestor, I started a duo, which it was called Ichiko. You probably can find some stuff on that on the internet. And we were kind of, it was a little bit like, what do you say, after the prime of Roxette. You remember the Swedish duo Roxette? So it was a little bit like that. Didn't sound that, it was more like rock, but still it was me and a girl, and we were like splitting the vocals, and we got a record deal with Virgin in Germany. So we lived in Germany for a couple of years, and we were quite successful. I think we sold over 100,000 CDs at that time, and we were the newcomers of the year and stuff like that. So that was, for me, it was like the first time that I really got the taste of, being on the big stages and stuff like that. And after that, I kept on, writing music, and I moved back to Stockholm. And at this time, it was like the whole Cheiron, Max Martin kind of era where the hit songs were really written in Sweden and especially in Stockholm. So I was lucky to be a part of that scene, and for like 5 years I wrote songs and produced songs for basically Swedish artists, but also I wonder, the Veronicas, they are not Australian, right?
Yeah, they are.
They Australian?
Yeah.
Yeah. I worked with the Veronicas. I did some songs for them. And,
Wow.
And, just doing that. And I was quite successful. I won a Swedish Grammy and a German Echo and, Song of the Year and stuff like that. So I did that for a long time. And then I started a band called Straight Frank. Straight Frank is on Spotify as well. And that was really like going back to the roots, because that was... if you have a listen to it, it's like somewhere in between Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and that grunge era, but with more like kind of detuned metal vibe. And we released 2 albums. I think one, I don't know if one of them you can find on DSPs on streaming platforms. That was released by Sony, and that was quite successful also. So we kind of toured around for like 5 years, and we did some support for Deep Purple, and that was quite... We never came to Australia, but we were in the main, in the most of the countries in Europe. And after Straight Frank, it was like, then the kids came, and you kind of slowed down a little bit. And I'm just going on now, so you have to stop me, Andy. But if you want to...
No, keep going, yeah.
Now, after that, this is 2010, I think, and my son was born, and at that time I was kind of tired of traveling the world or trying to be on one hand like an artist, and on the other hand a songwriter and a producer. It was a tough life, so I kind of settled down, got 2 kids, beautiful kids, and then a couple of friends and I started a company which was kind of also into music. It's called Epidemic Sound. What we did was that we realized that there's a lot of music that is written and produced, but it never really finds a home. So we had this idea that it would be great that kind of music that ends up in someone's computer somewhere, which is great, but it just didn't fit Christina Aguilera, for example. So we thought that there must be a market for this kind of music. So we had this idea that would be nice, and if we could kind of buy the music rights for this, and we can sell it to like TV stations and stuff like that. And so I did that for like 7 years, and then we were really successful with that one. So we sold that company, and after that one, I haven't really. That was 2017, and after that, I haven't really figured out what to do, and been in a really, luxurious position where I don't have to really work that much because of this. Because we sold this company. So at that time I started like, what kind of or what should I do now? But I was super focused that I wanted to keep on going with music. So first I thought that maybe I should do I do a little bit. I'm running a company nowadays that do a lot of music for the gaming industry, for computer games. So I started doing that, and I still do that. And then I was like, it would be nice to find a way for new artists, to find like a new platform for artists instead of, the traditional ways of Spotify and similar. Just gaming is a great way of building artists. So I started doing that for a while and still do. And since then, at that time, we kind of moved down to Spain because we just wanted to try something different. And then this is like 2 years ago, and since then I'm down here and doing the kind of gaming thing, and also like working on the Nestor thing.
It's interesting to see sort of that all the way along. It's always been music in one way or another. It's always been something.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating for me because my background is really, I play in a heavy metal band, and we're that old school heavy metal, Iron Maiden, Halloween, Queensryche, that kind of stuff. And I think traditionally, and especially in Australia, because this type of music, well, Iron Maiden's popular, but the other bands not so much. And we've just taken a very traditional path, and it's interesting to hear your story and the things that you've been involved with, where like most recently, sort of the gaming sort of aspect, where it's a new sort of avenue that's not a very traditional path that a lot of bands go down. But also,
Exactly, yeah.
also the songwriting aspect. And a fascinating thing I definitely want to pick your brain about it is when it comes to songwriting and having all these opportunities to work with different artists, how important is it to you to be able to collaborate with other people as opposed to just you coming up with a song idea yourself? Is it really important to have other people get together with yourself to try and come up with an idea?
Well, it's sometimes I feel, for example, with Nestor, I'm so, how should I put it? It's like the vision for me is so clear when it comes to Nestor. So then I don't really need, even though the guitarist John and I, we write most of the songs together. Then it's fantastic because he's like a fantastic guitar player. So if I have this idea and he starts to riff on it, it's like, yeah, wow, that's done. We're almost there. But when it doesn't come to Nestor, I think it's super nice to be more like a collaboration, like a co-write, that, you know, someone start off with something. I like to do the old-fashioned way that you're actually in some kind of rehearsing room environment where you know the drummer could like, hey, can you give me that, and yeah, great, and I got these chords and this melody, and what do you think about this? And you can see that, for example, that everyone seems likes it, and you kind of build on each other's energy, that okay, now the chorus is coming, and everyone kind of, and then the whole process, the creative process, I love that. But when it comes to Nestor, it's a bit different, because as I had the vision for me was so clear that we wanted to make an album that sounded like 87 to 89, and with all, so then the collaboration in that sense is actually the bands that used to be on top of the world at that time, listening to albums from that time, like, yeah, this is really cool, we should really have a song that is like 6 to 8 kind of sometimes, or it could be, it would be really cool to have a chorus where the vocals doesn't really belt out the chorus, instead going in a lower key, or not a low key, but sing it soft in the chorus. That would be nice, because that for some reason some band did that in the 80s, and I like that. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but sometimes it's phenomenal to have more like a co-write, more like a session. But for Nestor, I think it worked out quite fine, me sitting with the piano or the guitar and like laying down the first kind of sketches, and then send it off to the other bands and say, like, what do you think about this? And normally it's like, they have points, of course, but then when we record it, it's more in the studio where they can go like, I'd rather play it this way. Can I do that? Of course you can. But what feels best for you. This is great for me. I'll play it like that then. So,
because I think with our band, and probably with a lot of bands, the songwriting process is very it's very in-house. So there's not a lot of outsiders that will contribute any ideas. And I noticed that more in sort of the pop world, you'll have lots of different people collaborating and throwing different ideas, and I think it's a little bit more competitive as well, because it's a different purpose of people trying to get their ideas in there, because obviously there's a big return potentially if the song does well. But for us, like, our band, we don't get together often, so we don't see each other often. So we're just finishing. We just finished releasing an album full of cover songs, and now we've started to put together ideas for the next release. And so what we're doing, and it's just like this technology thing where, we're using apps now, and like BandLab and Cakewalk and all this sort of stuff to basically put ideas into the cloud and work on ideas back and forth remotely, where we're not in a rehearsal studio together, and that sort of concept. And I can certainly, I like the idea of it, but in a way, it is very old school, isn't it? Like these days, it's just everyone's busy, everyone's off in different parts of the world or different parts of the country, and it's just hard to get together. And now it's just a case of recording something into your phone or through your interface at home and just uploading it and going back and forth. So it's really different these days.
Yeah, sure. I totally agree. And both in a good and a bad way, but mainly in a good way, I think, because nowadays it's so easy to communicate, even though if you're not in the same city, as you say, or in the same part of the world, even you can just, I mean, tons of the album that we're working on now is half of it is recorded in a studio, half of it is recorded all around the world, not all around the world, but in Sweden and here in Spain. It's like, send over the guitars. Yeah, I will record them tomorrow. And the only thing that we've been consistent with is the drums, that we've done that at the same studio because we wanted the same sound, and that was the only thing. Otherwise, it's like it's done everywhere basically.
So you mentioned the couple of EPs that Nestor released early in the first era of the band. Is there any of that old music or those ideas that you guys had written back then that might resurface now, or has already resurfaced in some of the music? Are you finding that you're repurposing those ideas?
No, they are kind of too. We weren't that good songwriters at that time, so maybe I think the only thing that we might look back on and think is great is the energy. We had a lot of energy, and that sometimes when we talk, we say like the energy we had back then, we should try to get that back, because it's easier when you're like 20 years old. Plus 40 is more like, yeah, can we do it tomorrow, because it's more about the energy, not so much not any ideas that we have picked up. No,
so it's capturing, I guess, well, you said it, the energy, that vibe from what the band was at the time, but really you're starting a new chapter. It's a clean slate. It's all fresh ideas, and just going back and listening to old stuff, like bands that you listen to, and that's what's influencing what's coming out now.
Yep, exactly like that.
So growing up, what were those bands or those albums? Like what were those definitive albums that really captured your imagination, or really sort of got you inspired to even think about wanting to be a musician?
Oh, wow. Well, tons of them, I guess. But I remember that first of all, I think the first album I ever bought myself was like the Kamikaze Syndrome with Slade, I think, back in 1984. I was like 10 years, not even 10 years at that time. But that was the first one. I remember that I loved the song, what was it called? I believe in love and my, I believe in love and my, what was the song? And then that was a hit. And when I started to like, okay, that song is great, and listen to the album, realized that, they have tons of great songs. So that was like not an epiphany, but almost like, okay, I bought the album for one song and the album was great. So I shouldn't say that's not one of my best albums ever, but that was the first one, as I remember. But the ones that really got me into what we're doing right now with Nestor was the, first of all, it was the Animalize album with Kiss, with Heaven on Fire. I loved that album. And also then when I heard that one at my cousin's place, then I got the Lick It Up album. That was the previous one. And then got into Creatures of the Night album and a lot of Kiss at that time. But then I really fell into the whole Mötley Crüe. I thought that Shout at the Devil album was super, super cool. Probably because it looked dangerous, basically. They were covered in blood and stuff. I don't know if the album was that good, but still it was really cool. And then after that I got more into, at one time I was really into like Yes, and I remember, do you remember the album 9125?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, with what was it called? The Owner of Lonely Heart was a big hit, but that one I loved a lot. And then I was into Genesis for a while, but then the biggest ones always has been Kiss, Van Halen. I also like Twisted Sister. I was in the band nowadays. Everyone tells me like Twisted Sister were really shit, but I liked them. I thought they were cool. So, and then of course you mentioned Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime was of course like wow. When that album came, that was like a new. And Halloween, of course, Keeper of the Seven Keys albums was a huge inspiration. And I remember Future World was one of the first time when I heard that one was the first song I heard, I think, with Halloween, which was like, what? How can he sing like that? but I never really been into Maiden. I never really got into that. It has been like, yeah, Kiss, Van Halen, Mötley Crüe, Aerosmith, of course, but they are kind of a little bit too old. Def Leppard. I love Def Leppard. I like the Hysteria album. Was wow. It was like also like, what the fuck is this? How it sounds now? You know, how can it sound this great? You know.
And especially
so,
an album like that, like just takes so long to record as well. I think that one just took a crazy amount of time to get out there.
Yeah. No, but it was like it's hard to but these, I think these are the bands that really you know made me or yeah, these are the reasons, I guess, that I wanted to be in, and also wanted to be, because I always come back to the fact of to the, you know, being 5 guys or 4 guys in a band. That's the whole, for me at least as an artist, being on stage, that's what I love. You know, that constellation is brilliant, I think.
What do you think it is about all these bands that you just mentioned, these albums, where obviously there's a nostalgia attached to it, where you probably have really great memories of listening to these albums in different moments of your life, but if you're thinking from a songwriter point of view, if you're sort of, you know, looking at what's going on behind the scenes, like what do you think the essence is about these songs that make them really special or make them appealing to you?
Well, first of all, I think the whole era of the 80s is like, it was a time when there was no, the more the merrier. It's like you can, if you listen to an album like, as we talked about Hysteria with Def Leppard, it's like there was no, the melodies are huge. It's like really hit-based songs. Like the melodies are always, the choruses are huge. I think that, and the productions are also like huge. It's like you everything except, of course, there was tons of bands that were still back, like one of the best bands ever, of course, AC/DC, but they had like more of the 70s rock style kind of thing. But these bands like Bon Jovi as well, or Europe, like it felt like it was pop songs dressed up in electric guitars, basically, which I think for me was, which I reckon a long time after when I became a songwriter, was that I always loved melodies, and from the 80s, everything has a great melody. I shouldn't say everything, but the ones we mentioned, like the Halloween or Queenstrike, or it's melodies, harmonies, melodies.
I think it is something that I certainly am drawn to. I think, you know, when I listen, because I listen to lots of different types of music, and especially when it comes to metal music in particular, like I'll like everything from the very melodic to the very extreme. But I think there's something that, I don't know. I think everybody, when they hear a melody that somehow just sounds familiar, whether it be a sequence of notes or whatever it might be, that really sort of attaches, like you attach yourself to it. And I think it's a really underrated thing that I don't think a lot of people think about when they're writing songs. I think we sort of just write with whatever's coming out of us, but probably not crafting it as much as we could when it comes to making sure that something sounds pleasant to the ear. I think it's just, maybe there's a little bit more science to it, but I guess you don't want to be too analytical about it, because then you sort of lose the essence of what you're trying to put out there.
Yeah, that's true. It's like, it's easy to become very, especially when you're making an album like we're doing now, when we're going back in time and you actually have the references. All of the references are already written, so you kind of, yeah, what is cool about this song? Yeah, it's the cool thing is that they have a key change in the middle of the second chorus or whatever. Okay, let's do that. So when you start to think about it too much, as you say, I think it get kind of feel forced. You should really go with the feeling you get then.
Yeah, I think you miss whatever that special essence is, that special part of what's coming out of the artist. I think. You know, even the most, you know, popular artists out there who've been releasing these, you know, charting albums that have been, you know, the most successful albums in the world, I think if they were too scientific about it, then well, you wouldn't have that same success. I don't think. I think that's the personality of the individual has to come out.
Exactly. Agreed.
So with obviously there's only 2 songs out at the moment. Well, 3 technically, but 2 songs, but
Yep.
2 versions of one. And you mentioned that you guys are putting together this album. So what's the plan? Like what's is it going to drop a few more singles, or is there any sort of timelines that you can share about what the future holds for the band and getting some more music out?
Yeah, I can do that. Yes, we're planning on releasing the album, which will be a 10-track or 11-track album by mid-August, I think. That's the plan, at least. We're at the moment talking to different labels. We started off without one because we thought that I've been in this business for a long time, and sometimes it's great to have a label if they can help you with whatever you need to be helped with. But at that time, I got my studio. I know how to do it, and I'd rather see that we do it on our own till we're done, and then we sign with the label. So, but now as the 2 first singles has been so popular, it's like we can't really. It takes a lot of time answering, comments, and which is super fun. So we just realized that we need a label. So we're in discussions with 2 different labels, and we will probably sign with one of them. And if they don't disagree, the plan is to release the album by the 2nd week of August, I should say. It might change a couple of days, but that's the plan. And I think we're out of 11 songs, 11 songs, where 7 are almost done, or at least ready for mix, while three songs are more into the writing lyrics, overdubs, drums are done. Yeah, that's where we are at the moment. So our plan is I don't think we will release another single. We're thinking about maybe because, but the plan is to get the focus now is to get the album ready to be released by mid-August.
Oh, that's exciting. I can't wait. I mean, even just the first 2 songs and just seeing the reaction from people, I think just, when I mentioned earlier, I'm a massive AOR and 80s rock fan, and I always find myself sharing these songs, especially the more underground or obscure songs that never got their time in the spotlight at the time and are still sort of floating around now, and I'm discovering all this great music and I'm sharing it with friends, and you get mixed results from people. Like some people go, oh, that sounds really cool, and other people say, oh, that sounds so cheesy or dated. But the reaction for the first 2 songs that you guys have put out, I mean, it's incredible to see how people are reacting to it. I think it's just striking a chord, and just maybe it's the production, because it's more, it's modern, it's crisp, it sounds like it's 2021 in that sense, but it's got all that 80s vibe to it. Maybe that's what's helping, but it's amazing just to see people really responding to it in a positive way. And I think the other thing, and this is another question or a topic I wanted to talk to you about, was maybe the video clips are helping as well. Obviously the songs can stand up on their own, but the video clips are great. They're really, really good. And it looks like there was a lot of work put into those 2 videos. I mean, what was that process like? And given that you're in Spain, and, you guys are sort of originally based in Sweden, what sort of work had to be put into getting these 2 video clips filmed?
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, there was a lot of work into these ones, and the idea that I got from the start was also that if you're making an album from the 80s, you want to embrace that whole kind of, the videos, the movies, everything, the whole scene kind of thing, the cultural things, from the 80s. So yeah, I got this idea for when we wrote On the Run track that I wanted to make. It actually started out as we wanted to. I said to the guys that wouldn't it be nice to as we're going back in this time machine, so to speak, and making this album that we couldn't do back in '89. Wouldn't it be nice to make a video when we're getting into this car and we just drive into the night, kind of the last night before we are grown-ups, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. The last night being the last night of the summer vacation, or the last night where where the world was like, you're still a kid, you can do whatever you feel like, but the the next morning you wake up with some kind of responsibility because that's how it is. So it started off there, and then me and another friend of mine who isn't in the band, we started thinking about the script and what should it be about, and then we just added up stuff. Like we wanted to have an old Volvo, because that's what we used to have when we were back in. So we got that one. We didn't have the GLE, we had the GL, I think, but still. So we got the car, and then, okay, so we're going to have some scenes with that, and we have to have some, performing scenes. And then, of course, watching old movies and videos, it's always like this arch nemesis kind of a thing. Sometimes it's, if you look at Wasp, or if you look at Kiss, or if you look at Twisted Sister, it was always school or a teacher or a priest or something that was like, rock and roll is really bad for you, what you going to do with your life, all that kind of stuff. So then we just, we need a priest, and of course he needs to have red eyes and stuff like that. So that was the first video, and then when it was, if that successful, or people really liked it and commented on it, we thought that, okay, let's make another video. And then we thought that, as I remember it, there was like always band back in the day, they had a couple of videos, but they always had eventually a video where they were in the studio. That goes for Metallica or for Wing or for, Bon Jovi or whatever. So it's like, and that's quite easy, because the first video was really a hassle to get done. We had like 3 recording days. We had like 1 day outdoor sequences, 1 day where we did like the car thing scenes in the studio, and the third day was performance, which was like expensive like crazy, and it took a lot of time, and there was a lot of people involved. So when we did the second video, it was more like, the first video was in September, I think, and at that time it was a little bit softer in Sweden, so the pandemic wasn't that, there was no real restrictions at that time. But when we did the second video, which was in February, it was like Sweden never went into lockdown, but it was a lot of restrictions. So then it was like, we can't do that kind of video again, it's impossible, it's against the law. So then we were in like an old, really, actually Abba's old recording studio in Stockholm called the Atlantis, and thought that let's make a studio recording kind of a thing that, and then me and Henrik, which is his name is the director, we sat down and like wrote the script for it. Wouldn't it be cool if this priest who's in the first video is recording his like little choir, Christian choir, and they end up in the same kind of studio, and because that's, and then we wanted some 80s magic as well, by we thought about Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid, and Christopher, who's like this tone meister who knows everything about sound, and he's like the sensei of sound. We in the script it says that he's like, he can stop a man's heart by reversing, reversing sounds and stuff like that. It was just made up, and we thought it was a lot of fun, like, because in the 80s it was like that. There was always something overnatural, involved. So to answer your question, it took a lot of time to record, to do them, and we put a lot of effort into it. But the most important thing is that I think nowadays, when there's so much, what do you call it, like noise out there, you have to, if you want to make an impact, it's hard enough to do it with a video and great songs, or so we thought that if we have a video that really is like, for the one who sees it, or they're gonna immediately understand that, okay, this is the 80s, this is a band that it helps them to get that, the visual helps them to get what we're doing, basically. So yeah, it was super fun, but super much work, and yeah, but I'm super happy with the fact that people really seem to like both of the videos.
Do you have more ideas for more videos? Like, are you guys going to plan to do more videos when the album comes out?
Yeah, we have tons of ideas. Yes, we have a lot of ideas, but it's like some of them are like, we had this crazy idea. I spoke to Henrik earlier today because we have this idea that we are aiming to do the album but we have this idea of maybe making another video before we release the album, but that depends on the whole pandemic and time and all that. But when we talked about that idea, which I won't tell you about today, because that's a secret for now. But we had another idea that Henrik said, like, would it be nice if for one of those songs, we have a song on the album called it's called what is it called? These Days it's called, but as a working title. Anyways, he said, like, because John is really playing this super fast arpeggios in that one. He said, like, it would be nice to shoot a video at Area 51, in the Nevada.
Yeah.
And it's like, what happens in the video is that you kind of realize that you are not humans. You're from space, and you can push different buttons in your back where you play really fast and where you sing high notes. And the whole video is about this scientist that realizes that, and they form this band called Nestor and send them out on Earth, basically, and they're not humans. That was an idea that probably be quite tough to get going, but still, maybe for the future.
I'll be following up with you in the coming months and just saying how's that Area 51 video going?
Yeah.
One thing that you mentioned earlier was about how much noise there is out there. Like I think that's one of the challenging things where we're in this era now where, it's easier to film things. It's easier to do a video clip. It's easier to put music out there, and that's great in the sense that everyone can be creative and express themselves. But it does mean that there is a lot of competition. There is a lot of noise, and it's hard to cut through that noise. And you really do need to do something that's not so much different, but I guess it's just a different take or just something that's going to cut through that gets people's attention. And like for us, like, when we, like years and years ago, like I can't even remember what year it was, but when we put out our first video clip, that was, still in the 2000s, but it was still a bit of a novelty to be putting video clips out there. It was still relatively tough to put together a video. But now, like, if you put a video clip out, it could just get lost. And all that effort that you put into it it'll just get lost in the depths of the internet, and no one sees it because it's not really getting played on television anymore and things like that. And, people aren't watching TV like they used to. So it's very different. So I appreciate what you guys are doing because it's obviously it's got the humor, it's got the songs, and it's obviously, I think for a lot of people when they can see the references, they can see all the little tributes that you guys are putting together, and it's a bit of a nostalgic sort of thing that people can latch onto and go, that's really cool. That reminds me of that movie or that particular time in my life when I was growing up in the 80s and things like that. So I think it's really, you guys have done such a great job with those two videos.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, but I agree with you. And I love it myself. If I see stuff that reminds me, there's I don't know if you heard about them, Carpenter Brut. They like, their videos are just amazing, and they are of course a little bit more futuristic, but still they have like these 80s things to it that looks amazing, and you go like, wow, you really, everything, it looks like an old horror movie, but also it's like feels like it's 2021 or 2022 even. So no, I really like the visual thing that got lost. It's like a cultural thing that doesn't exist anymore. It's art that got lost, like music videos. Like if you remember back in the 80s and 90s, it was like there was no band, like a famous band, that didn't have videos. Look at Michael Jackson. His videos turn into like movies, even though that was a bit of a hybrid, I guess, but
Yeah, and even the artwork as well. I think one thing I've always said this on the podcast. The people listening to me are going to say, "Oh, I know what Andy's going to say," but in the early 2000s or late 90s, early 2000s, when the CGI graphics started to become popular, the artwork suffered big time. People just put these really horrible computer generated images together, and it was almost a response to people starting to download music, not buying music like they used to. And so people thought, well, there's no point putting together or spending a lot of money on artwork because people aren't buying the physical thing anymore. They're just downloading MP3s or whatever. And I've seen a bit of a resurgence where people are spending more time and effort and money on that visual aspect, not just video, but just the artwork in general, just to ensure that, people can be attracted to a band in not just from an audio point of view, but from that visual aspect, because I think it is a bit of a case of, judging a book by its cover. I'm sure you're the same. Like when you're a kid and you go into a record store, I mean, when you first start to discover music, you're attracted to album covers to begin with, and you sort of go, that looks cool. And then you go home and you listen to it, and you might be pleasantly surprised, or you might be really, really disappointed, but that artwork is the first thing that sort of captures your imagination.
Yeah, sure. Definitely like that. And I remember like sitting on the bus. I remember that I got I think it was Bryan Adams, the Reckless album, and I bought it, and I remember that I was on the bus home, and I took the, what do you call it, the inner part out, and I looked at the lyrics, and I was like, thought in my head, like, I wonder what this song is about, You kind of, that idea, that got lost somehow, as you say. And yeah, nowadays it's so easy. The access to music is so easy. It was harder before. It's even like sometimes when you got an album back in the day, or that it was like, if it wasn't that good, you didn't, at least for me, I didn't have that money so I could buy another one. It was like, I have to make this album good. So I listened to it like 100 times, and eventually it was like, yeah, it's great. I love it, but it wasn't probably. But nowadays you listen to one song, maybe two songs, and then like, yeah, maybe, skip a couple of them and listen to number 7, and then like, oh, I have heard this before. Thank you very much. Goodbye. So it's a totally different way of consuming music nowadays, which it's not super good. It's like, it was better back then when you actually took time. And also listening to music nowadays, it feels like when I grew up, you had vinyls, you were actually just sitting down and listening to the whole thing, and then you went up and changed side and listened to another five tracks. And that doesn't really happen nowadays. I think when I look at my kids doing TikTok and whatever they do, they never listen to music like that. They have something connected to the music all the time, if they're doing dances or if they're playing a game or if they're doing something. But it's a different thing of consuming music, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of it these days as well, where you have Spotify or even at home, like playing music. It's while I'm doing something else. I'm not just sitting there like I was when I was younger, as you said, like sitting down and just listening to a record or a full album from start to finish. It's like you listen to different songs here and there, or you go, oh, I might want to listen to that, but it's sort of almost a background sort of thing rather than it being an immersive experience. And I think every once in a while I'll be like, I'll have a few beers and I'll be sitting down, and then I'll be able to capture my attention long enough where I'll sit down and go, oh wow, like why don't I do this more often? And I think that is something that is lost. I think we want to do everything at the same time, and as soon as you do that, you lose your focus. Yeah,
definitely. I agree.
So I'm keeping an eye on the time, but before calling you, I was talking to Mark, who is our guitarist in the band, and he can't get over how good 1989 is. That was the first song he heard. Then he went back and heard On the Run, and he's just obsessed. And he's inspired. He's like, I've got these great 80s riffs. We're putting together stuff for our next releases, and it's totally fired him up. So he gave me a list of questions, and these can just be quick answers, or however long you want to spend answering them. But they're Mark's 8 80s questions, and it's a bit of tongue in cheek, a bit of fun. So number 1, oh, actually, by the way, I'll just insert some really 80s music right here. Okay, all right. And so question number 1 is your favorite 80s TV show or movie?
Oh, movie, hard one. But I have to say Back to the Future.
Back to the Future? Yeah, that's a good one. That's a classic. Question number 2. What were you doing in July of 1986?
Oh, wow. July 1986. What could I have been doing then? Probably probably, I don't know, probably I played a lot of tennis at that time. So maybe I played tennis, I guess. Or yeah.
Very rock and roll. I think I asked him, I said, why 1986? He goes, oh, you can just pick any year in the 80s. That's fine. I'm like, oh, okay, no worries. Thanks. Question number 3. What is your fondest 80s memory?
Oh, wow. That's a tricky one. But I think I remember one of the funniest memories is that I went to see this other like local band playing at the theater in our hometown, small town, and what was new, or what was the memory of it was that they used like construction. What do you call it when you're building a house? They use like this construction stuff on the outside, to be able to be on the second floor or whatever and work on the outside. So they used these kind of things to set up the stage in our little theater, and I was like 89. I was like 14 years old or whatever, and I thought that was so cool. It was off the hook cool, and I remember that as a wow, this is next level. And then I think my dreams of becoming some kind of rock star began. So that has to be the answer. I can't remember any concerts because I was a bit too young at that time, but probably I saw some, but that was one of them.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. That's cool. Question number 4. Why is the mullet the coolest hairstyle?
I don't know if it is, but no, but I guess it's like I don't know. I think I just watched the video Angelia with Richard Marx the other day.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Great, yeah.
Yeah. And his mullet is out of this world. I think his head is as big as his body. His mullet is as big as his body. It's crazy. It's huge. It's like he's wearing some kind of Indian helmet. I don't know. But yeah, I think it's even cooler when the mullets don't move, when they just, even though you move your head, they are like...
It stays in the same position.
Exactly. That's a true mullet.
Oh, that's funny because, Richard Marx, I've always looked at him. I've been really surprised when I see like a full body shot of him because he's quite thin. Like he's a thin guy, but his head and his hair is so massive. It's almost like those novelty dolls with the big head, the bobble head sort of things. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. I'm going to go and listen to that album now. That's some classic 80s ballads on that album. Question number 5. What's your favorite 80s arcade game?
Okay, tons of them, but I have to say Ghosts and Goblins.
Oh, yeah, wow. Yeah, cool.
No, I actually bought one of those old arcades, so I got that one, Ghosts and Goblins, but I played all of them, but Ghosts and Goblins is my favorite still. I got one of these. It's new produced, but it looks like the old one, so.
Oh, that's cool. That's awesome. Question number 6, best 80s concert experience, which you kind of answered before, but can you remember anything that you went to in the 80s, even though you're a little bit young?
I remember that I saw, I think it was Europe with my cousin, and it was not on their Final Countdown album, it was on their Wings of Tomorrow album, but I never really saw the concert because I was short and I was like 13 years old, and the main, the audience were like 20, so from where we were standing I didn't see anything, but I heard that concert and I thought it was amazing. So I guess that's I love that album as well. Wings of Tomorrow, Europe. Before they gone soft, as they said, like on the,
great album. Question number 7: if you could bring back one 80s trend, what would it be?
One 80s trend. I kind of like the topless thing, the topless trend. I would like
to bring... happened frequently, didn't it?
Yeah. In the 90s, it was just gone for some reason. But here in Spain, it's like it's not gone still. But back in Sweden, I think it's long gone. But in the 80s, there was like every girl was like topless for some reason, during the summertime, of course.
and especially like in the movies as well, like every 80s movie had like a scene in the movie, so it was just like it was like the checklist of things that need to be in an 80s movie, and that was one of them that was always there. You guarantee it.
Yeah, definitely.
And last question, On December 31st, 1989 at 11:59 p.m., were you sad that the 80s were about to end?
No, I wasn't at that time. I think I was looking forward to the next year, basically. I didn't really care about it because, I guess it's looking back when you were there, it was more like any other year, basically, I think.
Well, Tobias, thank you so much for this great chat. And it's interesting to learn more about your story, like the background and just to like hear like how Nestor has come to be, especially coming out of the pandemic, which is like super positive. Like there's been so many, really challenging things that everyone's gone through over the past, year or so. And there's been some really cool stories, like some great moments and things that have come out of this pandemic. So I'm glad Nestor has been one of them. It's been fantastic to learn more about the band and yourself.
Thank you very much, Andy. That's a pleasure to be on your podcast. And as you say, it's like, I think there will be a lot of good stuff coming out of this shit, if I can say that. But one thing is, as you said, it's like getting together with old friends and making an album. It's so far, this has been out of the pandemic, this has been the kind of the funniest thing about it, that we always, working on new songs and imagining how it's going to be when it's done and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Alrighty, folks. Now, if you haven't heard these songs yet, just turn the podcast off now. Just go and listen to them. Go and get amongst them. Get into them. Share them around. Give them a bit of love. I mean, these songs are absolutely incredible. So hooky, so well crafted, and just I can't stop playing them. They'll definitely be my most played songs of 2021 when you get those end of year Spotify results and all that sort of stuff. But go and check it all out. Follow them on the socials, facebook.com/Nestor the band. Instagram.com/Nestor_the band. Of course, on Spotify, Apple Music, and all that sort of stuff. I'll put the 2 video clips in the show notes over at andysocial.net and andydowling.net. And please reach out to Tobias and the band and just let them know what you thought of this episode and, of course, their music. And from what he's saying, there's plenty more to come. And I'm looking forward to hearing the album when it eventually drops. And I've become a fanboy. I absolutely love this band. And I must make a side note. Ichiku, I think the name was name of the band. I'm going to put this band in the show notes as well. This is the project or the band that Tobias was previously in, and they were signed to a label in Germany, major label in Germany, and had some great success with an album. And I listened to this album, and it might not be for everybody. It's very, very poppy, but man, it is so good. And you hear that talent, that songwriting talent in these songs. There's just so many great throwbacks to Roxette, Harem Scarum, even stuff like Alanis Morissette, and I'm just trying to think of other artists off the top of my head, but very poppy. It's got some rock in there. It sounds really cool. If you're open-minded and you really love that sort of stuff, then click through in the show notes and check out Ichiku. I'm pretty sure it's called Ichiku. So anyway, go and check all that stuff out. I hope you dig it. Now, before we wrap it up, of course, patreon.com/AndyDowling. It's the best way to support this podcast. Honestly, thank you so much to everybody who continues to support. We're doing weekly Patreon podcast episodes each week, funnily enough. And I'm doing a whole bunch of different things in there, sharing what I've been listening to. In fact, a very important and interesting thing to note is that I discovered Nestor from Release Radar and listening to Release Radar through the Patreon episode. So each week I go and look at whatever Spotify's throwing me in the algorithm of Release Radar, and I just go through and listen to artists that I'm already aware of and listen to the music for the first time, and also pick a few wildcards. And Nestor was actually a wildcard that I picked up, and I thought, let's give this a go. And wow, incredible. So, and then here we are, just done a podcast with Tobias. So it's funny how it all plans out. But Patreon, with this podcast, we do Release Radar. I talk about books that I've been reading, YouTube rabbit holes. We pick a story each week, something weird and crazy that's either happened in the world over the past several hundred years or something more recent. We've got planes, trains, and automobiles. We've got a bunch of commercial breaks just to give you a piss break and a beer break or whatever you want to do. And it's just a lot of fun. It's just a bit of silliness every week in your ear holes. And hopefully everyone in the Patreon community certainly enjoys it. And hopefully you will too when you join. Patreon.com/AndyDowling is the best way to support. And a massive thank you in particular to my top tier, my top 2-tier supporters. I'm just trying to find my piece of paper here. These guys are my heavy hitters, the heavy lifters that have been supporting me for quite some time with Patreon, and they're part of the wider group of absolute legends who are supporting over at Patreon. So thank you very much to Andrew from Perth, Mick G from Sydney, Ash from Deniliquin, Dan from Dapto, Rod from Rayleigh in North Carolina, Patrick from Canberra, Liam from Brisbane, Chris from Sydney, Brendo from Leeton, Tim from Canberra, James from Brisbane, Christian from Canberra, Steve from the Gold Coast, and Andrew from Sydney. Thank you very much, folks. If you want your name to be a part of that, go and check out the tiers over at Patreon. And I do a shout out for absolutely everybody in the weekly Patreon podcast episode as well. So even if you want to join for $1 a month, you're still getting a shout out. And I'd love to be able to say your name each and every week on the Patreon episode at the very least. And for some of you on the Andy Social podcast as well. But go and check it all out over at patreon.com/Andy Dowling. Now, next episode. Actually, I know what the next episode is going to be. An author of a book that I just read a couple of months ago. So if you're following me on Instagram at Andy Dowling, go through my my Instagram photos and you'll see some of my book posts. So at the end of each month, I take a photo of all the books I read in that month, and you can have a look. And I think it might have been last month or the month before that this person's book was in there. So go and have a look. It's one of those authors. He comes on the podcast. We had a great chat. I actually went on his podcast as well. So if you see my name pop up on a podcast around now, at the time of this episode coming out, then you'll be able to put 2 and 2 together. But I'm looking forward to sharing that one with you. A really fun chat and a great book as well, something that I really highly recommend. So stay tuned for that. But until then, Patreon, social media love, share the episodes around, dig into the back catalogue, say hi to all the previous guests. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. And until then, take care and ta-ta. Larry,